This is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer, joined as always by my co-host, Brian Solomon. What's up, Brian?
Not much. Happy to be here as always, Al.
Yes, and joining the show, is this the first time? It's at least the first time in a long time, right?
First time in a long time. Certainly first on video. Very excited to be here.
PWI contributing writer, Brady Hicks. I think it's fair to say long-time PWI contributing writer, Brady Hicks. How's it going, Brady?
It's going well. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to do this.
Absolutely. I'm trying to do more of this. You know, it is the PWI podcast. Sometimes I think maybe I get too far away from the branding, but certainly an opportunity to introduce a lot of people from the magazine to our viewers. Why don't you tell us a little about yourself? How long you've been with the magazine now? You might have me beat.
I started in, I think it was 2006.
Yeah, so you got me beat by like a year.
With a cover story on Edge and Lita and their relationship. So it was interesting. And I mean, I've been a reader most of my life. So it was a huge deal for me to be able to join the staff and I love it. You know, it's just wrestling is a huge part of what I do. So.
Yep, and Brady's got a lot of his own endeavors that we'll talk about a little later, including one pretty exciting thing, I think, but we'll touch on it a little later. Right now, well, let's tell you about what we're going to be talking about. A very busy couple weeks in pro wrestling. I feel like I'm saying that a lot, but you know, Brian, the day after when we got on last to record, just before we got on, I learned of the death of Terry Funk, and then the show really became in large part about that. And then the day after recording, we learned of the death of Bray Wyatt. I mean, just an awful 24 hours. We'll get into that in a bit. Also, several big shows since we last talked. All In, All Out. To a lesser extent, Payback, but a lot of news in there, and obviously the fallout of all in was the firing of CM Punk, and can't say we didn't see that coming to some extent. So we'll get into that more in a bit. Right now, let's tell everybody about the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Is the November 2023 issue with Matt Cardona and Steph DeLander on the cover. This is available now at PWI-online.com. I imagine it's available at your local bookstore if you still have one of those, or your newsstand, or what have you. But if you go over to the website, PWI-online.com, you can download it right away or have it delivered to your home. Obviously, the way to go is to subscribe. And now we've got these combo deals where you can get both the print edition and the digital edition together. Big discount over the cover price. Tons in this issue, including the PWI poll and so much more. But I would be remiss if I didn't look ahead to the next issue, which is the biggie, the PWI 500. I think we're a week away from announcing the top 10. I was just looking at the emails, and I think once again we've got plans for me and Candace to be on Busted Open and make the big announcement. So an exciting time. You don't want to miss it. It's a big one. Again, head on over to PWI-online.com. No spoilers, Brady, but I imagine you've seen the list and any thoughts on, did we get it right this year?
I've only seen number one, and I was more than happy with that. So this has been a very busy summer for me. I haven't had a lot of involvement with it. So.
Yeah. I think there's going to be a lot of talk about number one. Again, you don't want to say too much, but I think it's a newsworthy one. Again, PWI-online.com, PWI 500, ranking the top 500 wrestlers in the world, and so much more content in their analysis, historical perspective. This is now the 91 we started. So what's the math there?
33rd.
33rd PWI 500. Yeah. And so this makes it so I've been part of fully half of them now. That's pretty cool. And I guess you, Brady, even more than that.
Yeah, I guess so.
And actually in that issue, in this PWI 500 issue, my Way It Was column, which is the retro column, I actually looked back at the first PWI 500 and I broke down the top 10 and talked about, like, could you believe that these people were still wrestling at that time? Like the Sheik and Bobo Brazil are on the list.
Wow, or like crazy, yeah.
Or in some cases, could you believe this guy is still wrestling? Like Dustin Rhodes is on the list, things like that. So that was, I tried to kind of add a little perspective on that.
Was Jericho on that first PWI 500? Probably not. He had just gotten started.
Jericho was not ranked. No.
Yeah. But I remember, I mean, even the layout was completely different. It was sort of like a fold out, right? So you read it
Yeah.
sort of kind of like portrait mode,
Right.
this way. And
Hogan was number one because he had won the Royal Rumble that year and he'd become the champion, for the third time. That was a big year for him, so he was number one.
And was Zeus 500, if I remember
Yes,
correctly?
Zeus was 500. Correct.
Was he really? That's funny.
A little statement made by the editorial staff of PWI.
Gangsta.
We did not have the activity standards back then than we have now, because I mean he got in, I imagine, with like a match.
I also noticed, I also noticed there was back then too a little bit of that. We talk about the Dean Malenko effect, where people were getting high rankings, not based on really what they did, but based on their abilities and how good they were. Because, no offense here, Ricky Steamboat's in the top 10. And I'm sorry, but 1991 was not really a banner year for Ricky Steamboat. That was when he was the dragon in the WWF and basically on the undercard, and he wasn't really doing all that much. He went back to WCW at the end of the year, but clearly he got his top 10 ranking just because he was one of the best performers in the business, So there was some of that.
Well, as heavy a lift as putting the 500 together is these days, I can't imagine. And I've talked to, various people who were involved in the 500, certainly Bill Apter and Stu and some others over the years. I can't imagine that work. I mean, there's no YouTube, there's no internet or anything, I mean, I remember I came in sort of in the tail end of sort of the remnants of that original era, where there was a lot of mail packages coming into the PWI offices, videotapes. You remember any of this, Brady?
Yeah, I do, sort of. I mean, I wasn't really around the office per se, but I can remember the sheer quantities that Stu used to receive. It was insane.
Yeah, I should ask Kevin, but I think we still occasionally get, a couple, sure. Obviously a lot, but like the 8x10 and a VHS of highlights and all that stuff.
Right.
And so it was just a crap ton of work, I imagine, 33 years ago or whatever it is, putting this together. But still a lot of work now, and you don't want to miss it. And again, it's coming out next week. It's really one of the, if not the big highlight of our publishing year. Head on over to pwi-online.com. Check it out.
I was going to say, just imagine the process of putting that together without the internet. How insane it must have been.
It's wild to think. I mean, we can jump on something like Cage Match or Wrestling Data, and you can go, okay, here's what the guy's been doing all year. And I mean, which is especially helpful when it's somebody, let's say, who's not in a major company where, everybody's following it very, very closely. Like I said, my hat's off. And I guess a lot of it, I mean, I don't know. None of us were here then doing it, but I feel like a lot of it, part of it might have been a lot more kind of like your gut feeling on guys rather than having numbers in front of you. Like, I feel like this guy needs to be higher, like a little more than that, And
also, Bill Apter was in the field, so he knew everything.
Yeah. Sure. Yep. And I don't know. I'm sure they spelled out criteria. I don't know how closely it was followed. Again, I don't think there were issues like activity, standards for activity or anything like that. So I think it was a lot of gut and elbow grease.
Which, if you think about it, it might explain more of why, ability was so much more of a ranking factor, because that was something that you could get a handle on, even if you didn't have in front of you everything that they were doing all year long. You knew, okay, this guy's really good. This guy's not as good. You know what I mean? That might explain why that was much more of a part of the ranking criteria.
Yeah. Ahead of the next episode, where I imagine we'll be talking more about the 500, I might dust off my copy somewhere, and it'll be fun to have it in front of us and compare the two. All right, let's talk some news, guys, and we should start with the most unfortunate news. And again, it came right after we last recorded with the unexpected passing of Bray Wyatt. I mean, what can you say? An absolute tragedy. We had heard for months about some kind of illness. People talked about a life-threatening illness. It was all very vague, and we had seen over the years Bray disappear for months at a time. So I think a lot of people, myself included, didn't think much of it, given that he had been open about emotional issues, mental issues over the years that he had dealt with. I assumed wrongly that that's what was happening here. And then you hear just this awful news that I guess he was suffering from COVID for some time. That explained his disappearance right before WrestleMania. He didn't get to work with Bobby Lashley at WrestleMania. And the word in recent weeks was that he was on the comeback trail, right? And there was talk of maybe an imminent return. Obviously took a turn for the worse, had a heart attack, and we lost Bray Wyatt at just 36 years old. You know, we're here talking about him because he was a pro wrestler and a prominent one for this generation. Obviously, that's all trivial relative to the fact that, you know, 4 beautiful kids lost their dad, and you know, his wife lost her husband, and you know, one of the things that makes it that much sadder is that he was part of this wrestling a family where we kind of, you know, saw him grow up. You know, the grandson of Black Jack Mulligan, the nephew of Barry Windham, the son of Mike Rotundo. So such a deep wrestling. On one hand, this is, you know, kind of the paradox of Bray Wyatt. On one hand, a guy who is steeped in so much wrestling tradition, and on the other hand, a guy that bucked it like few others, you know, and became a controversial figure in that ways. I mean, like, I'll be upfront, I wasn't the biggest fan over the years of his act at times. And again, that's trivial compared to everything else. But regardless, and I always think back to that COVID WrestleMania in 2020 and the Firefly Funhouse match, and how incredibly polarizing that was. And I remember seeing that and thinking like, oh my God, this is just the worst thing. How could anybody like it? And just being barraged on social media by people who absolutely loved it. So, you know, I think that's sort of Bray Wyatt's legacy, you know, thinking outside the box like few others could. Sometimes I'd say to a flaw, but it really is a matter of taste. And certainly one of the most influential wrestlers, I think, of his generation. Brian, what do you think Bray Wyatt's legacy in wrestling is going to be?
Well, it's true, like you said, that he bucked tradition, you know, being somebody from a wrestling legacy like he was. But the thing that I found about him, which tied into that legacy, is while he was doing all that, he had, like you see in these second generation and third generation wrestlers, he had an instinct for the business. He had an understanding of the business that a lot of times you don't get if you're just coming in cold. Like, he knew how to get himself over. He understood that that's the most important thing, is getting yourself over. I mean, whether you like, you know, he was your cup of tea or not, and he wasn't always mine either, the man knew how to get himself over. And I think the biggest thing for him, if you look back at the last 10 years, I mean, definitely one of the best promo guys in the business, without a doubt. I mean, I know that sometimes, again, people would get tired of his shtick or his routine, but I mean, like, you could say that about any one of the great promo people lately. He's on a national spotlight, a national platform on a weekly basis. It's very hard to stay fresh, but he was inventive. He was creative. I think that, you know, the talent was there always. And in some cases, the creative didn't always do him justice. And that's coming from the company and also coming from his own instincts. I think sometimes he was somebody that needed to be kind of reined in or kept on a path or whatever. But the ability, without question, is there. I mean, he's one of the most talented, unique pro wrestlers of the last 10 years, you know, creative or not.
Yeah. Were you a fan, Brady?
I was a huge fan. In fact, like, I would say that this loss kind of was on the same level as Eddie Guerrero for me. Because I think, you know, he had this unique ability. He got it. You know, he was able to reinvent himself as he needed. Kind of like The Undertaker or Chris Jericho, you know, like over the years they evolve into what they think it needs to be. I've been thinking about it a lot because I had some time to digest it. And I think there's a short-term and a long-term loss here. The short-term is obviously we're not going to see him wrestle anymore, and that sucks. And you know, the programming, how he may have benefited it when he returned. But the long-term is he was only 36.
Yeah.
And this is a creative mind that I think probably would have been around the company, or at least wrestling in general, in a creative capacity for probably 40 or 50 more years, you know. And he was really good at that. And I think that the long term, that's going to be the far bigger loss, is all of the ideas and all of the things that he could have contributed to that would have made wrestling better. Just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, was one of the big contrasts to draw with the death of Terry Funk the day before, and that image of the WWE roster on the stage for the 10-bell salute with the split screen with both of them. It's like, man, what a just awful 24 hours in pro wrestling that you're looking at the picture of Terry Funk and Bray Wyatt next to each other. Brian, we talked about Terry Funk. At least with Terry, and no less tragic, but at least with Terry, it's like you knew you got everything out of him, right? I mean, like there's no second guessing. One more match. Oh, only if we only had him around for another year. I mean, obviously the guy was wrestling into his 70s. He left it all out there and squeezed every last drop out of his career. As Brady touched on, Bray Wyatt was just getting started. I mean, he was actually younger than I thought he was, which speaks to how young he was when he was headlining pay-per-views with John Cena as a top guy in his 20s. And incredible. And you're right. I mean, even for people like you and I who didn't always love the act, there should have been so much more left to give, and it could have and should have evolved so much more, and was, right, because this last evolution of Bray Wyatt that we saw was different than what we had seen, and it didn't always hit the mark. Again, such a polarizing guy. The last match we saw him with LA Knight at Royal Rumble. Again, the guy, sometimes to his own detriment, was so creative. And I remember Triple H talking about this just before Bray came back. And he said he was like the most creative guy I've ever known. But I think he described him as like a tornado that like somebody had to steer in the right direction. And you saw that in real time with his promos and his angles. And, it's just, it was a fever dream, right? I mean, all the time. But underneath all of that was just immense creativity, and I would have been so interested to see where that would have been, and I would have been really interested to see something of a more traditional presentation, drawing on that legacy of people like his uncle Barry Windham. That's why when he was out, I was really curious about him potentially showing up in AEW, being forced to drop the Bray Wyatt character and coming in there as Wyndham Rotunda, maybe more of a traditional presentation, but with those incredible mic skills and that incredible athleticism. It's just, again, there should have been so much more.
Right. And I think that they saw that in him too. I mean, I really think that you could see in the booking and the way he was handled that, they almost looked at him as the potential to be kind of the next Undertaker type of phenomenon. And in terms of like, he was a unique, special kind of wrestler. He was an attraction. And I think one of the things that, in today's wrestling, the way it's presented, it is very hard to maintain that kind of, if that's the type of wrestler you are, it's hard to maintain that. He was like an Undertaker or an Andre the Giant kind of thing, or like, the kind of wrestler that is not done any favors by being on TV every single week. That's the problem. That's why Big Show could never become Andre the Giant, because Andre the Giant didn't have to be out there, doing jobs to people and on TV every week. So it's very hard, and I think that is not a mark against him or a detriment to him at all. He absolutely would have continued to be a special attraction for WWE, something very special and unique, if he had a chance to continue on. It's just a shame that we won't get to see it, because I really think that he was special.
Yeah. Brady, what are some memories you have when you think about Bray Wyatt? What comes to mind?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, obviously, I think the big one for me is the two WrestleMania matches. The first one, obviously, I think a lot of people really felt like WWE had a chance to make Bray Wyatt even bigger than he was by having him beat John Cena, and obviously WWE decided not to go in that direction. At the time, I understood it, because I could always argue that the bigger star always won at WrestleMania. But kind of looking back, I do see like how beneficial it might have been for him. The the Firefly Funhouse match a couple years later during the pandemic, that was interesting. The traditionalist in me hated it because, it wasn't a match. Like you said, I think Fever Dream was the best way to put it, really.
Yeah.
That's what it was, But creatively, I think a lot of the ideas, a lot of the incarnations that he had, the Wyatt family was amazing. The Firefly Funhouse stuff, I felt like it was overdone, but I could kind of see what he was doing there. The Fiend, I wasn't a huge Fiend fan, but I could definitely appreciate the fact that he kept trying to do something different. So, there's a lot of different memories there. I was actually in attendance at Extreme Rules in October when he came back, and the reaction that crowd had when he came out. And I know they were probably expecting him, but one of the top ovations I've ever heard live at an event. It was amazing.
Yeah, I thought that night, and even more than that, the build up to that night, and the kind of viral teasing on TV every week, the dropping little things here and there, was kind of Bray Wyatt's brain at its best. I thought that stuff really, really worked and got people excited, and you're to the point that like people were seeing things that weren't even there. Like, is that a hint? Is that a clue? When something happened on AEW programming some months back where, what was it, like the word no or something appeared on the screen like for like one frame, and immediately some of it jokes, some of it not. It's like, oh my God, is Bray Wyatt coming to AEW? But he had that kind of effect on people because of that, and because of the way his brain worked. There was a lot of swings and misses, right? Not everything worked, whether it was the Fiend stuff. I remember, I guess he had a couple matches with Randy Orton at WrestleMania, and I don't think either worked all that well. In the big, were there people who liked them? Sure, but I remember there was one with like a projection of bugs on the ring. You remember this? And then there was one that I went to in Tampa a few years back, which is the first one kind of post-COVID, where there was the big Jack in the Box, and this was when weeks after he had been set on fire in the ring. And again, it's like it was so up and down because his entrance to that match, you remember he walks through a tunnel and then it's sort of like he comes back to life and you see him transform walking to the ring. I thought that was tremendous. And then the match, not so much. And I think that was always the challenge. And, I wrote the last big feature on Bray for the magazine earlier this year and talked to some folks about it. And that was sort of the consensus, was that super creative, like this brilliant mind, but in pro wrestling, at the end of the day, it's like this has to conclude with a match. And a match is set, in this world of pro wrestling with certain rules. And it's different when you're fighting like, one of the contestants is this supernatural being. And again, I'll be honest, the worst wrestling match I've ever seen was a Bray Wyatt match. And it was the Fiend and Seth Rollins at Hell in a Cell. And it is to say nothing about Bray Wyatt's athleticism or ability, or certainly Seth Rollins. It was just this crazy experiment. And for me and for a lot of people, I don't think it worked. But, and that's the thing with Bray, was unquestionable creativity. But he was a genius, right? But kind of a mad genius. And, I do think, and that's why it's almost that much more heartbreaking, because I think this most recent version of Bray Wyatt sought to address some of that, and it was just getting started. But I was, when you think about that promo after he came back at Extreme Rules, where it was very kind of heartfelt, and we saw this more of kind of a human presentation of Bray, but with all the elements of his history and his past characters kind of blended in. He clearly had something in mind. He always had something in mind. I think sometimes it was difficult for him and for WWE to take what was happening in his brain and present it on television. But again, at 36 years old, there was so much more time to develop that and harness it. And that's why it makes it, I think, even in a business where unfortunately we talk about tragedies all the time, that much more tragic just because so young. And, I went right to like his social media stuff and was after his uncle, Barry Windham, was hospitalized. And who would think that Barry Windham would end up outliving Bray Wyatt? When he was in the hospital, he gave this incredibly heartfelt message to his fans, where he was very reflective and kind of talking about mortality and all that. And to see that within this context, now that he's gone, absolutely heartbreaking. You see his beautiful little kids. It's just, it's as sad as it gets.
For sure.
Yeah. Go on, Brady. Sorry.
I was just going to say, the thing that comes to mind for me is out of the box. Everything that he did was good, bad, or otherwise. It was out of the box from what you would traditionally see, and that's where I think his long-term benefit would have been. In that environment.
Well, I think towards the end there, what's so interesting to me is one of the last things I think that he did, and I don't know if it was planned this way or not, was he got LA Knight over. I mean, that was, I don't know if that was what they were trying to do. I get a sense it wasn't, because they were just getting Bray off the ground. And LA Knight, that's when he first started to, I mean, a lot of us knew he was amazing for years, but that's when he really started getting the attention of the WWE audience. He was getting those responses where they were like, hey, I know that this guy is supposed to be kind of Bray Wyatt's whipping boy here, but we kind of like this guy. We kind of like the attitude that he's bringing to it, and he's funny, and he's kind of saying these things that are making people connect with him. That was like the start of it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought, and they obviously had so little time to turn it around, but that tribute show and closing with LA Knight, I thought it was classy. I thought it was well done. Do you assume that we see him inducted in the Hall of Fame this time? Come this WrestleMania, I think that would be entirely appropriate.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, he's definitely going to go in, and I mean, it would seem like it would be the time to do it. Sure.
Yeah. I imagine the question is, how his family feels about it and whether they're going to be up for it by then. And I imagine that'll be just incredibly emotional. So, again, I hate to do this again, but extending our condolences on behalf of the whole PWI family, obviously to the Rotunda family. Okay, let's talk some other news. The other big headline coming over the last week, the firing of CM Punk, and we'll talk about All In and All Out somewhat separately. But obviously, the backdrop here is Punk's latest brawl backstage with another wrestler and big skirmish with Tony Khan. And this one, maybe in some ways, even uglier than the first, if only because it was more in view of everyone and seemed to actually involve Tony Khan this time around. They mulled it over for a week, and then the day before All Out in Chicago, where I think the hope, the idea would have been to have Punk headline this event in front of a hometown crowd, we get the news that he's fired for cause. Tony Khan going on television. I mean, a memorable moment, him saying that he never felt like his life was in danger before. So that really speaks to how serious this got. To me, I mean, just to quickly share my thoughts, clearly this was not a sustainable situation, right? I mean, whoever you want to blame, it seems like it was just a miserable atmosphere for everyone involved. I understand, I really do understand Tony Khan trying to figure out a way to make it work, because Punk is worth it, because he is a fantastic performer. I think has solidified himself as an all-time great. In a weird way, I mean, tying it back to Bray Wyatt, a genius in his own right, I think. I mean, as far as like a brilliant performer, I think like a lot of brilliant artists, sort of tortured by his own art, right? I mean, I think like he feels it so deeply that little things become huge things for CM Punk. And he makes himself miserable, and he makes other people miserable. And, I think we've talked about it here, but we've all been in that job where maybe somebody's really good at what they do, and maybe they sell more printers than everybody in the office, but they are just the most miserable person to be around, and it's not sustainable for for morale in a workplace. So I think this was the only way it was going to work out. I think it's a huge blow to AEW. I think Punk will be just fine. We'll talk in a moment what becomes of Punk. But Brady, let me ask you your thoughts on this. And was this inevitable?
Yes, it was inevitable. I mean, it seemed to me to be inevitable anyway. It's weird because you mentioned like that miserable employee, that was really good at what they do. But it would be like if your boss said, well, I'm going to take half the company and put you in another building and work. It was, they basically created a show around him. And my argument the whole time was at some point, everybody's going to be under the same roof again and the same problems are going to surface. I didn't expect him to come back in June with Collision. I really didn't. I was shocked that they decided to bring him back because it was so clear to me that right, wrong, or otherwise, there was a large percentage of that locker room that weren't happy that he was there. And I don't see how you can sacrifice the feelings of a large percentage in favor of what seemed to me as an observer to be just a handful of people that were very happy to have him involved. So to me, it was kind of inevitable. And it's sad to see. I was hoping that they would find a way to work everything out. And even with like a sort of a soft brand split or whatever they said, I was hoping that would give them enough of an opportunity to allow him to continue to excel at what he does, make the company a lot of money, certainly increase their exposure. But it wasn't to be, I guess.
Yeah. The funny thing of Brady, and I think Brian, you'll agree with a lot of this. If you looked at Punk's gripes and arguments like on a piece of paper, and if you had both sides kind of argue their side in documents in court, I think we'd agree with CM Punk a lot in what his gripes were. I mean, I think he made a lot of sense in what he pointed to. He made a lot of sense in the issues that he brought out. He didn't handle it the right way.
Right. And I think that's what it comes down to. And I have to say, first and foremost, that you cannot let Tony Khan off the hook here, because I think the bigger picture of all of this is that it was allowed to get this bad.
Right.
That it was allowed to get to this point and fester for a year, more than a year, because it probably goes back to when he first got in there. So maybe almost 2 years, to not be able to get a handle on this to the point where it gets this bad. Because I think, and I'm not absolving Punk for doing the things that he did, I also want to be the one to say that, people that act like fights in locker rooms are, like some type of like Pearl Harbor tragedy. I think we need to get a grip on ourselves. Like these things, they do happen a lot. But again, I'm not letting him off the hook. I understand there's got to be repercussions. But again, that it was allowed to get to that point. You have, Al, what you were, I think, hinting at is this kind of like whatever the opposite of a perfect storm is what they had. It's just you have a combination of a locker room where, from what things I have heard from people, and this is even from people who have been in there and worked there, is, it's very different from WWE. It's not as you get the sense that it's more like people that just kind of want to do their thing and have fun and have the kind of matches they want to do and be with their friends and just, work once a week and that kind of thing. And then you have somebody who spent years in the WWE system who is a prima donna and not somebody who is good at keeping their mouth shut and going with the flow and just letting it, not harshing anybody's mellow. You put those together and you have a mess on your hands. Like, I think there are people like Chris Jericho, to me, is the example of the flip side. He's somebody that could just go, you know what? I'm 50, whatever. I'm at the end of my career. I'm making really good money. Yeah, I know that a lot of what's going on here is nonsense, but am I really going to make a stink? No, I'll just go with it because they're showcasing me very well. And, I'm doing all right here. I'm not going to mess this up. But I think there are a lot of people that if they were put in Punk's situation, look what Cody did. I think Cody had his response to it. He was a WWE guy. He was a guy that understood the way he felt the business should work and what the company should be. he didn't go choking people out. He just said, I'm going to get the hell out of here. Like, that was his response. And Punk, that's the way, unfortunately, that Punk deals with things. That's also why he had his falling out with WWE. So I think that it's just this big, giant mess. I don't think you can villainize any one person, but I think what we can all agree on is that it was not sustainable. That somebody with his temperament and his kind of like perfectionism and the way he had gotten used to, working for, let's say, a company like WWE, and just his passion for getting the business right, he was not going to fit in with the culture over there, which I think is more like $1 billion independent promotion, honestly,
Absolutely,
in the sense of the company culture. That's all.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I mean, I think the comparison with Jericho is an interesting one. We've seen Jericho adapt a lot over the years and evolve and always kind of trying to stay ahead of where the trends are. Punk, not so much, right? I mean, Punk is CM Punk. He's always been CM Punk. I think he feels the way I'm doing it is the right way. And if you disagree with me, you're all wrong. And I think often, I mean, if you think about the origin of and what we know of it, of this latest skirmish with Jungle Boy backstage, Jungle Boy Jack Perry wants to go through real glass on a television show, being watched by, I don't know what it is, 500,000 people or something like that. And CM Punk, the veteran, says, maybe that's not such a good idea. And I mean, knowing that little bit, and maybe, there's more context that's required. But I look at that and I'm like, yeah, CM Punk is 100% right.
He also wasn't the first person to say that. It had come, like Tony Schiavone as head of talent relations had told him no. Other people had told him no. And they basically had gone to Punk to be like, could you please talk to this kid? Like, that's what had happened. It wasn't just Punk's going off on his own saying, don't do this. That was like last resort kind of people just throwing their hands up and saying, can somebody please tell this kid not to put his head through a real plate glass window, please?
Yeah, right. And you think back to the real origins of all this with Adam Page, it was something similar. It was Punk. It was this notion of, and I do think it is a cultural thing in AEW, and it's their calling card. So it's hard to criticize them about it, because if they weren't this way, they wouldn't be AEW, and this is what their fans want. But they do want to do things their own way. I think, on one hand, there's a respect for tradition, but also I think, it is that indie mentality. It is that like, don't, thanks, you old head, but we got this. We're good. We know what we're doing. And if I want to do 88 high spots in the first 5 minutes of my match, I'm going to do it. And you can't tell me any different. And, and it's funny because we talked about this, but like when Punk left WWE in this huff and just hated it, I never want to go back there again. And the thought was that AEW would be like this perfect fit for him because they really love wrestling. And, I think everybody realized that couldn't have been more wrong. And he's a terrible fit in AEW because he's a grown-up. He and a curmudgeon-y grown-up. Right. And, and AEW is, and I don't want to be disrespectful, but they're, it's just a different kind of mentality there, and he was not going to work there.
Right. I think it's just like I said before, I think a lot of it is they like to do things their way, and I think it comes down to, for a lot of them, they're having a great time, and they don't want anybody to mess that up. They don't want anybody to mess up the vibe, that kind of thing. And Punk is the ultimate vibe disruptor. I mean, look, Regal's another one. Look what happened with him. The minute he realized, look, what am I doing here? Like, no one cares about what I have to say. No one's interested. Other veterans have said it, Tully Blanchard or Jake Roberts, who were like, they never asked me. And I know people, and I know people who've been there who've said from their own eyes that they see that the agents, quote unquote, it's just sort of like, yeah, that's nice. Okay, great, awesome.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, it couldn't be more different. Through. Right, from WWE. I mean, it's night and day.
Yeah, and it was really interesting that this was after All In, right? That Punk shows up at the Cauliflower Hour Club, right, and gives this speech where he kind of like reveals himself, and you see like sort of what he's about. And he talked about Harley Race, and Punk wants to wrestle in 1984. I think that's like what it gets down to, and God bless him. And because of that, this was completely unsustainable. Brady, anything you want to add to this?
No, I think you guys definitely we approached it from both perspectives.
Yeah.
I don't think that any party involved is 100% in the right. I do think that a lot of this could have been avoided had Tony Khan been a stronger personality that I don't necessarily know that he is. I think it was Bully Ray said that, and I thought this was a really good point, that they need a bad cop in that locker room. They need a guy.
Kevin Nash say it too. Yeah,
right. Maybe that's who it was. I don't. Yeah, but they need a guy with the authority to shoot people down who's not afraid to actually do it. Sort of like Vince did for so many years, and like I think Triple H probably is along the same mold.
Yeah. But if you had that, it wouldn't be AEW. And that's the thing that I am, and we'll talk about the booking of their two last shows in a moment. But on one hand, I watch a lot of the decisions made by Tony Khan and by AEW, and I think, they're getting this totally wrong, but I am mindful of like, well, am I just programmed that the WWE way is the correct way? And how often have we criticized wrestling companies, whether it's Impact or WCW, for just kind of trying to copy the WWE way? So I appreciate that. That AEW does things differently is why they're AEW. So I get it. That said, I do think that there's some things that are more clear that there's a right way and a wrong way. And when you have a situation like this that is this ugly, and there's plenty of blame to go around, but absolutely, a fair amount of that blame has got to go to the leadership at AEW for letting it get this far. As far as where Punk goes for now, do you think he's done? There was he visited with WWE locker room some months back. There was some kind of talk that he was maybe feeling around for whether he could get a job there and making amends with some folks. On one hand, and my quick thoughts on this. On one hand, I feel like he's happier outside of wrestling, sort of like day to day, watching hockey, walking his dog with his wife. But I don't know that he's super fulfilled. I think like whether he wants to admit it or not, wrestling fulfills something in him. So I don't doubt that maybe he's got something more to give. I think coming after all this, sort of the perfect fit for Punk is a job in WWE with the Goldberg schedule or the Brock Lesnar schedule, where he's a guy who you bring in twice a year and you put him in a program where he destroys The Miz or he destroys Dolph Ziggler, and you make sure you do it at Chicago and the crowd goes nuts. That as far as the on-air side. As far as day-to-day, I think what we've seen is that I think he could be a really good coach. Maybe kind of a jerk of a coach, and we've all had those coaches, but I think he's got a lot of wisdom to pass on. I think the NXT atmosphere might be kind of perfect for him because these are all young people who they're there because they want to make it onto the main roster, and they have to be coachable, right? Or they're not going to make it. So if you sort of like, decree that Punk is the guy, listen to what Punk says, I think that could work pretty well. I don't know where the interest level is and something like that, or that's essentially the job that Shawn Michaels has now, but I'd be really interested to see that kind of arrangement.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brian.
No, please. It's okay.
I was going to say, I agree. I think NXT would be a great fit. The 22 to 25-year-old that's there now was 12 to 15 and watching CM Punk 10 years ago. Probably a huge fan because he got over like amazingly toward the end there with his run. I think it's a unique time in the company history too, because with the impending merger and everything, A lot of the powers that be aren't necessarily going to be the ones making those decisions anymore. So, yeah, I mean, I'd be all for it, the things that you outlined.
Yeah.
Yeah, and WWE is very hot right now, and I think, this would be I made a joke, and I was only half kidding when it all happened, that, if I was Triple H right now, I would be dialing Punk's number so fast that my phone would catch on fire. But I mean, I think that in the long term, Punk is going to just be, if he goes there, he'll be happy as can be and everything will be wonderful? No, I don't. And I think, like you said, it should be something that is not really kind of like where he's now back to being a full-time part of the roster and he's a part of all the long-term plans and everything. I don't think it works out that way. But I do think they'd be foolish not to. I mean, there's a lot of value there. There's a lot of kind of increasing the company's buzz and increasing how hot they are by, think of what they could do with him and Cody. I mean, there's like built-in storylines there.
Yeah.
Think
Roman,
of what, have him challenge Roman Reigns. I mean, you're talking about a roof blowing off a building if you play Cult of Personality. I mean, it's worth it for those kind of things in the short term. Even put, I don't know if he's a person that's going to beat Roman, but I mean, there's so many things where he could be put into the mix to help that company even more. Do they need him? Because when I said that, everybody was like, they don't need him. They don't need him. And I agree, they don't. They don't need him. But it certainly would be a bonus to them if they could do something with him. And then, like you said, Al, then he kind of settles into, because he's not a kid anymore, then he settles into that kind of like lead agent type of position, or somebody that's working with Shawn Michaels. My understanding is that he's got a lot of respect and admiration for Shawn Michaels and that he was a fan of his. I mean, that could be a good fit. Have him, he's got a lot to contribute. And I think, as crazy as it sounds, it's almost like the plot to It's a Wonderful Life, where it's like all of a sudden now Punk realizes, maybe it wasn't so bad. Maybe I could go back there. Maybe that's really where I belonged all along. I kind of think that might be what he's thinking now. And I think it would be better for him to be there.
Yeah, I agree. And we've seen it's sort of Triple H's superpower is to bring back these guys who you'd think were never going to be in WWE's good graces again, whether it was, Bruno or the Warrior or what have you. This is a little different because some of that animosity is with Triple H himself, not just with Vince. But it sounds like
true with Cody. But that was also true with Cody.
Right. And I think a lot of that's been patched over. And I do think that Punk probably has a very different perspective now on how everything went, whatever it was, close to 10 years ago. I actually think like this could really work. And I was just looking, when's the next time WWE is in Chicago? And it's for Survivor Series.
Yeah.
One of the big ones. It's not super clear like what his status is right now. You'd have to do it in Chicago, right? I mean, like you'd have to bring him out in Chicago. And just to, where do you go from that? But imagine, Cult of Personality starts playing at the end of a Survivor Series. It would be a moment. And I really do think, looking at these past couple years with Punk and how his whole experience went in AEW and everything that went wrong with it, I do think it sort of makes it more likely that a WWE run would go right, because I think you'll have a completely different sort of appreciation for a person like Triple H or Vince McMahon or Cody and say like, yeah, these guys get it. These guys get what the job is, and that, we're here to make money. And in a way that I think some folks at AEW don't understand. This dovetails into the other conversation, which is about All In and All Out, two huge shows. Brian, we were pulling our hair out for the last few weeks, even figuring out why they were doing this, and when they held so much back from All In, which was in front of 80,000 fans, this record-setting crowd, the thought was, well, it must be because, they're really gonna like deliver with All Out, and if All In is the comedy match between Adam Cole and MJF, then All Out is where they pull the trigger on the real like grudge match, big marquee. And what did we get at All Out? Adam Cole and MJF defending the Ring of Honor tag team titles against the Dark Order. It was confounding. I mean, really, the booking of those two shows is one of the craziest things I've seen. And I get like the different arguments, and I actually saw Jim Ross, who I have just a ton of respect for. And I don't know if this was before, I think it was before All In, going online and taking issue with people criticizing the booking of the shows before a single match got into the ring. And he says, how can you criticize booking if, none of these matches have taken place yet? And I thought that was just completely wrong as a take, because they're really two different things. And it sort of went exactly how I expected, which is that on both shows, they delivered a bunch of great matches. Absolutely. Yes. Right. I mean, like 5-star match after 5-star match, but that's only part of the job. And I think you could argue less than 50% of the job of a wrestling promoter, and the majority of, or the most important part of a wrestling promoter's job is to promote, to make people excited about a card. And if you were giving them a report card for, all of this, all in and all out, if there's a line in there, match quality, A+, right? For so many other things, including booking and just sort of like conceptualizing of these matches, I think there's a lot of F's and D's, and you end up with a report card that is maybe around a C or a C-. But I see people heaping praise on this company for how good the matches were, and I think they're just completely missing the mark.
Yeah, and I think that more and more it seems clear to me that, and I felt this even at the time, but I wasn't totally sure. I really do think that this all-in opportunity at Wembley, it felt to me like a very kind of knee-jerk reaction. I think it was the kind of thing where they got wind of the fact that, it's okay, it's August, it's SummerSlam, Wembley Stadium, that's when they had it, and, it's available. Okay, yeah, screw it, let's do it. Like, it was that kind of a thing. Like, yeah, we'll make it work. And they never stopped to go like, wait a minute, we have a pay-per-view 1 week after. It's kind of the one we've established as our big one. It's like, they didn't have any matches lined up for it apparently, and they just kind of winged it. I do feel like there wasn't a lot of thought put into even why are we doing this show. It was just, it's available. There's an opportunity. Let's do it. In fact, I remember it was at the time it was coming out of Clash at the Castle. It was almost like that. It was like, they did a big show in Wales. Okay, Wembley, let's do it. Boom. It was like some kind of crazy stream of consciousness decision. And like you said, it now looking back on it, look, they did what they've always done, to their credit. Very good pay-per-views, very good matches. Their pay-per-views always deliver. And we didn't even mention, and it should be mentioned, Bryan Danielson stepping up to the plate in the absence of Punk, and really putting on an incredible match there, and really in some ways saving the show. But again, you look at it and you go like, with All In especially, it's like a week out, and it's like it never happened. And I hate to be that cynical, but it's like they still can't sell out, an NBA-sized arena for a TV taping where they already have half the arena blacked out for TV, and they still can't sell it out. And the TV ratings just the same as they ever were. It's like they just can't create those moments and create the momentum to grow and get people talking. And it's just like very short term. Okay, we're going to do a really great show. Okay, now we're going to do another really great show. And there's nothing kind of stringing it together. And I think this all in and all out thing was the biggest example yet of exactly that problem that they have.
Yeah. Brady, you agree?
I do. Yeah, I think it was a reactionary decision based on a lot of different factors to kind of book the show overseas. I think it was a calculated move to increase their audience and increase the buzz around the company heading into the biggest show. It turned out to way overshadow, I'm sure, to an extent that they didn't even expect. But you know what? It's part of the new wrestling where content is king, and not all of the content is necessarily good, but there's such a focus on quantity. How many pay-per-views did we do? How many hours of television do we have? And you're seeing it across the board to the point where it's almost impossible. It's mind-numbing to keep up with everything that's out there. And I think AEW is just following suit the same way the industry's been growing over the last 30 years.
Yeah, and it's worth noting. I mean, we're being critical of AEW, and as I pointed out, it's like there is an AEW way of doing things. But I'll also point out that it wasn't always this bad. I mean, and in fact, for a long time, they were pretty good about building a lot of anticipation to a marquee match at a pay-per-view. That when it came into the ring, whether it was take your pick, MJF and Moxley last year, or there were a lot of these matches that they would foreshadow months in advance and build and build and build, and then pull the trigger at the big pay-per-views. So that's what has made these last few weeks so just kind of confounding. I mean, that they did All In front of 82,000 fans with kind of a so-so card, and then a week later come back with a pay-per-view that is headlined with Orange Cassidy and Jon Moxley on a week of buildup. It's crazy. I think it's indefensible, and just pointing out that, well, they were really good matches isn't the point, right? Because it's literally sort of the indie wrestling model where you go to your local indie show, you won't even know what the card is. You're just going to go see some wrestling that you like, and see some cool moves and stuff like that on the biggest of stages. I don't know, a year from now, maybe a month from now, I'll defy the average fan to name me 3 matches that happened at All In.
And let's not forget,
I don't know how I can do it now.
Well, let's not forget too that this is the big factor here, which can't be overlooked. They were asking fans to pay $50 2 weekends in a row.
Yeah,
I don't think we can overlook that as just whatever. I mean, that's a weird choice. I can't remember any company ever doing that. WWE now, they have their model of the network or Peacock, where it's like you're not paying for individual pay-per-views anymore. So sometimes they'll do some that are maybe a little bit closer together than they traditionally would. But I don't even think, even with that price out of the picture, that they would do something like this. And again, we're not saying AEW should be another WWE. Absolutely not. It's not good for the industry. You need to have a solid alternative. But that is a baffling kind of decision. And maybe the numbers will prove me wrong that the AEW viewers have like limitless pockets. But I know, like, for me, I purchased All Out. I did not purchase All In because I'm not going to spend $100 on wrestling pay-per-views from one company within a 7-day period. That's insane.
Yeah, and even the numbers, and I think people will point to numbers and say, well, see, you're wrong, it worked because they sold, this many tickets or this many pay-per-views. But that doesn't take into consideration how much more they could have sold, right? How much money was left at the table. If they ended up selling 150,000 pay-per-views for All In, that just tells me that the ceiling could have been so much higher. And if they booked the card that people really got excited about. So I think, there's people can have different opinions, but I think some of this stuff is even if you think it turned out well, it is hard to dispute that there wasn't a better and a much better way to do this. If there's like an upside, it's that it's just been such a chaotic, crazy few weeks for AEW. Now kind of settle things in. Punk's out of the company. There's a little more, you got Danielson back. There's a little more, you got these big shows out of the way, some time to build to the next show, settle in and kind of get everything, back in place, and then move ahead. But I do want to see more direction. And I do think, I think Brady, as you touched on, that there's a real need for a deputy over there, right? I mean, Tony Khan needs help.
For sure.
Yeah.
And if you were to ask me, I would have thought Arn Anderson and Jake Roberts could have taken care of that, but apparently they're not willing to give them that kind of power.
Yeah, I don't know how good a fit it is. I mean, I think because there's such traditionalists, and again, going back to what we're talking about, I don't know how much guys like that. I think there's lip service paid to respect for them, But I do think those are kind of guys that you offer advice, and they're sort of dismissed as like, yeah, okay, boomer, or whatever it is they say, right?
Right.
A guy like Jerry Lynn or somebody who's there who I think maybe in some ways is closer to their generation. But then Punk
again,
was too.
You always run into the problem of there's got to be some teeth to it, because they're never going to want to listen to somebody, apparently it seems to be, that tells them something other than what they want to do or the way they want to do it. So no matter who it was in there, which is Tony knows better not to do that. So there's got to be some kind of a repercussion. Like, it can't just be like, listen to what we're saying, or we're going to tell you again. Like, there's got to be like, you do this is the way it's going to be done. But otherwise, it doesn't matter who's in that spot. Because I think there are, like, I think even somebody like a JR who's been struggling to find, I feel like, a role where, he's not the announcer maybe that he used to be. And he has that reputation now for being like the naysayer in the company, the person who's biting his lip, who doesn't want to say, well, maybe you harness that, you channel that, take him off the broadcast booth where people have said, okay, he's knocking the product or whatever. Take him out of that position, put him in a position to be the bad cop. And yeah, people aren't going to want to hear what he has to say. And they're going to say, oh my God, it's old JR telling us to do like what Bill Watts would have done in 1983. But maybe they need that. If you want to talk about bad cop, he's the ultimate bad cop. But there's got to be teeth to it. Otherwise, they're just going to ignore him like they would ignore everybody else.
Yeah. But again, you have to ride that line of understanding that this is a different company and they have a different vision.
But I think if you have Tony and you have JR, I think that balances out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I agree. Yeah. I mean, clearly it needs to be addressed. Whatever the solution is, they need to be in search of some kind of solution. Let's quickly touch on some WWE stuff. Not a ton going on. We had a pay-per-view. It was, I think, fine. Some good action, but nothing earth-shattering. Again, I think it's as close to sort of an off-season right now for WWE as you get. Seth and Nakamura was fine. A little disappointing. I mean, again, Nakamura put in that big stage to deliver, and once again falls a little flat. We saw the tag team title change in a really fun match with Judgment Day, which are just like, they're doing so great. Judgment Day is such a fun act right now. Dom is just, I'm really interested in the most hated wrestler of the year voting, PWI, because I got to think he's very much in the mix. And I loved that on social media, there were people accusing WWE from this past Monday night of piping in boos, because he couldn't possibly be getting booed that loud that you almost couldn't hear him talk. And he is. I mean, he's got next level heat, Adam, and is a ton of fun to watch. But I think in some ways, sort of the most newsworthy thing actually in WWE doesn't come out of Payback, and I guess technically hasn't happened by the time we're recording it, but it's Gunther now closing in on the longest Intercontinental title reign of all time, which I guess by Friday he will have. Brady, what's the significance of this? I mean, does it? Again, the business is a work, but it says something that this is the guy that WWE chose to finally break this record that's been in place for 35 years.
Well, listen, Gunther is an amazing wrestler and athlete. We've all known that for a long time, that he can do things in that ring that half that roster can't. The ring general, like, that's the perfect description for him. But I feel like a little piece of my childhood is dying, because I remember when Honky was the champion, when Honky Tonk Man held that belt, and he was the greatest, and it was amazing. And there was a part of me that was hoping that he would fall just short of it. It's obviously not where they're going with it, but it's very bittersweet for me. But if somebody had to do it on today's roster, it would be him. I just don't know that you had to do it.
Yeah. Brian, are you assuming that we see Honky Tonk Man in the next couple of weeks?
I'm not assuming it. I don't think that's what they're going to do. I would love to. That's the difference. I would love to. I think they've been name dropping him. They talk about the record all the time. They put him in the Hall of Fame a few years ago, so he's had some visibility. I just think it would be a fun little thing to do, but it feels like the moment has passed unless they have him pop up on SmackDown, which he's not even on that show. Or they could even, nowadays they could even do it as like some kind of an online exclusive or something, but it wouldn't have the same kind of impact. It would just be a fun moment. It's not crucial. Unlike Brady, I hated the Honky Tonk Man as a child. As a 12-year-old boy, let me just explain this, who was so excited that Ricky Steamboat had overcome the odds and had won that belt. And to me, who had just started watching wrestling, it felt like Randy Savage was the IC champ since the beginning of time. And to have Ricky Steamboat like do it and get it, and it's the Pontiac Silverdome, and I was like, 2 months? I was new to wrestling. I didn't get it. I'm like, okay, now he's gonna ride off into the sunset, and I'm like, 2 months, and he lost it. And I kept saying, okay, he's gonna win it back. So it drove me insane, which is exactly what it was supposed to do. That the Honky Tonk Man held that title for so long, because I think part of the gimmick of it at the time, and forgive me for saying this, was the attitude of they wanted people to be like, this guy?
Yeah.
This is the guy that nobody could beat. Like, that was the source of all of his heat, that he just seemed like such an unlikely case to be this world-beating champion that nobody could beat. WWE, for some reason, they seem to be all about these records now, where they never used to care. It was just a thing that fans debated about. They never really made a big deal out of records as much. And, they killed the Demolition record. Now they've killed the Honky record. I think they're on a mission to put these very, very old records behind them so it doesn't look like in some ways their best years are in the past. That said, I think that I still say that Bruno record's going to last forever, because no matter what they want to do, because Roman Reigns isn't even halfway there. He's not even halfway there. What I do think he's going to do, though, and I think this might be something they're going to shout from the mountaintops, is if he makes it to the Royal Rumble, then he will have exceeded the second Bruno Sammartino title reign, the one from the 70s, he would have beat. But he's never going to beat that original, 7-year, 8-month reign. It's just, I just can't even imagine them. They'd be cutting off their nose to spite their face if they did that. If they just said, we're just going to keep it on him for 4 more years. I just think that would be ridiculous. But
does he, if he keeps it to Mania, does he surpass Backlund?
No, because Backlund is almost 6 years.
Oh my gosh.
So Backlund's like 5 years and 10 months. So, I mean, he just passed 3 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, you're really short of a complete sort of overhaul of wrestling philosophy. You're never going to see that, because in doing that, you're not setting up guys for the future. So who would want to come into WWE when there's essentially zero chance of getting the world title, because it's on this guy and it's going to be on for 10 years.
And I also feel like it's already, to me, gotten to the point where they're hamstringing themselves over this ridiculous chasing of how long could he hold the title, because they've clearly created this other world title for Seth Rollins for the purpose of extending Roman Reigns' title so he doesn't have to lose it to anybody. Now they've got this other world title. They're hardly having him wrestle at all. It seems like they're bending over backwards to just keep him holding it as long as possible to get this number of days, and it just feels like it's getting into the realm of being counterproductive at this point.
Yeah, because even those champions, whether it was Bruno or Backlund, were defending their titles and pretty consistently, right?
The average fan, right, and it's worth pointing out, because sometimes I'll mention like, oh, Bruno was defending it 5-6 times a week, and people will say to me, well, it cheapens it if you defend it that much anyway. And I agree to a point, but you got to remember, the average fan didn't know that. They didn't know every arena that he was in. But what they did know is once a month, he's coming to our arena to defend the title. So even if in their mind they thought, oh, he's defending it once a month at our arena, but the fans now aren't even getting that from Roman. You know what I mean? They're not even getting that.
Yeah. Want to drop in something here that is completely out of nowhere, in part because we got a Brady, and I know, Brady, you've done some ring announcing, but I have spent a lot of time in talking about all-time greats here. I think WWE right now has got an all-time great on their roster, and that's Samantha Irvin, their ring announcer, who I just think, and I've been watching so much of her stuff. She is so great at what she does. WWE's really landed on something special.
Yeah.
And I mean, you've got Howard Finkel, who obviously is the giant of all giants, but she's relatively new to this, and not to overstate things, but I think she's knocking at his door. I mean, I think she's that good. And there's a lot of these videos that they put on YouTube. They're just kind of like close-ups of her doing these ring announcings, whether it's coming down the aisle or announcing a winner. And it is such a performance for her where, it's like she's in the middle of a stage play or something like that, and delivering so much energy and unique calls for different names. And then as soon as she's done announcing it, she's like moving to the music. She just looks like she's having such a great time. And I think for what she does, she might be the most talented performer on the WWE roster.
So you've got her past Lillian Garcia already.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay. And okay. I would have her below the Fink because he's the Fink. He did it for 40 years. She's been doing it for whatever, 2 or 3. But I can't say enough great things about her.
I do think that she looks like she's having the most fun doing it. So I will say that.
Yeah. And a great voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's got a very good voice. Yeah.
Yeah. And you see, the ones that are real memorable is when she announces Imperium, because she really gets into the vintage, didn't she? And then the other one is Chelsea Green. Chelsea Green.
Yeah, exactly. Like she puts her own spin on it, which is really nice.
Yeah,
she was really good with Roman and the Bloodline when she was on SmackDown as well. It was like, just made it feel special. I do. Agree. Yeah, and
she pushes it to the point that she's almost like shouting, but it isn't over dramatic. It's sort of the right amount of dramatic, and just great. So that's out of nowhere, but I thought I'd bring it up. Real quick before we split. Every once in a while we talk NWA, and we finally have a new NWA champion, EC3 beating Tyrus. Tyrus retiring, or so he says. Brian, we've been critical of the NWA product over the last couple of years. Does this do anything to give you more confidence in Billy Corgan's vision?
Well, anything would have been better than Tyrus. I mean, having him now that he's lost it, and people are putting these. I've seen these posts where it's like, where does he rate? Where does he rank among all of the NWA champions? And I'll just say, well, he doesn't. It's so anything would have been, excuse me, an improvement over that. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if Ethan Carter III is the answer to that, or. But again, it's at least an improvement. I do have to say that they've kind of like started their new season of Power, and they've done a little retooling and revamping of the show. And there are things with this week. There are things that I liked, but I just feel like that company has taken so many hits over the years that it's going to take a lot more than a new champion, I think, to turn things around. But I mean, you got to start somewhere. So.
Yeah, I mean, I got to say, and I think Tyrus was as, and I want to be kind here, but yeah, I got the same issues everybody else had with Tyrus in terms of, and some of it is just age. I mean, I didn't realize he was 50 years old, and a guy that size, it's going to be hard for him to go at that level, and he's been doing it for a long time. But, if you ever pull up a Fox News on YouTube, Tyrus is all over it. I mean, he is like a personality on this cable network that has tons of viewers. So he certainly, I think it worked to give some awareness of NWA. There's Tyrus on these shows that are watched by tens of millions of people.
He gave them visibility, no question about it. And there were even times on a couple of those NWA shows where I'd look around the front row areas of the ring, and I hate the stereotype, but I'm going like those people those aren't wrestling people. Those are Fox News people. Which it's not the worst thing in the world. Like people are getting turned on to your product, fine, whatever, however you do it. But
yeah, and that's a double-edged sword of taking it off him. Is like, sure, maybe some of like the critics like us will get off their back about having the NWA title around Tyrus. But what does happen to their viewership? But I mean, if people are watching just because the guy from Fox News is on, that's not really sustainable anyway. I mean, you've got to build the company bottom up. CM Punk, we talk about wrestling tradition. in some ways, he'd be a perfect fit. I mean, I can't imagine. I'm half kidding, but you think Punk would love to hold the 10 pounds of gold?
Yeah, he would have, like if it was 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think like the you can't overstate. I mean, I was amazed to see the benefit of a platform. I mean, I guess I should have known, but even for a wrestler like Tyrus, I have a personal stake in the game here because I keep a close watch on the book rankings on Amazon for wrestling books. And let me tell you, man, his book is perennially number one. And you would go, well, how is that possible? You've got like Mox and you've got all the WWE books and things. And it's the Young Bucks. And it's like, nope, Tyrus. And why is it? Because he's on TV every week talking about that book to an audience that dwarfs a wrestling audience. And that's, I mean, you can't underestimate it.
And he gives, I was watching him talking about his retirement on Fox News, and they've got, they're showing stills of him in the ring with EC3. And if you're not a fan of wrestling at all, you'd think this was like a big show, like, oh, this must have been like WrestleMania or something that this happened because he lost the world heavyweight title. And where else are they going to get that kind of credibility? So I don't know. I should point out I saw Smashing Pumpkins in concert last week, and they were fine. So I don't know how good a wrestling promoter is, but still a decent rock star. All right, we're about 1:15. So let's head out of here real quick. Brady, why don't you talk about everything you've got going? Including, am I correct that you are either have been or about to be inducted in the ECWA Hall of Fame?
Yes, next Saturday. I'm really excited. So ECWA Night of Unusual Matches. They actually surprised me with that honor. I never would have expected it. Certainly not this soon. I hope that's not their way of kind of pushing me out the door.
So tell people what the ECWA is.
So the ECWA is one of the top independent companies here on the East Coast, certainly in the Philadelphia area. It's in Morganville, New Jersey right now, not too far from like Tom's River. So ECWA is primarily known for the Super 8 tournament that happens every year. We cover it usually pretty extensively in PWI. Top 8 usually independent stars trying to make a name for themselves, with this tournament. So ECWA has a long-standing tradition. It's been around since 1967. And, we're under our new owner, Ryan Cavanaugh. He's been the owner probably since about 2019, 2020, somewhere around there. He has really placed an emphasis on the history of the ECWA and looking back on it over the years. He's actively working on a Jim Kettner documentary. Jim was the longtime promoter, very well respected in the industry. So I'm excited to be a part of that. So ECWA runs every few months out of Morganville, New Jersey. And if you can't be there live, ECWAWrestling.com, you can also purchase the stream on the Premier Streaming Network. So there's that.
And you've got your own podcast that is going strong, right?
I do, yes. In the room. Well, you can't see it because of my chair. In the room, VOC Nation. I run the network, and we're live every Tuesday night. We try to get guests from time to time. Recently, we had Brian Kendrick and the Warlord were the two big ones that we had. We had Lex Luger earlier this year as well. But we take calls and we just try to have fun with it. Basically, it's more like a live radio stream than it is a podcast. So it's always a good time.
Yep, and obviously still contributing to PWI, and they can find you at Brady Hicks on. I guess we're not calling it Twitter anymore. X, whatever it is.
X, whatever it is. Yeah, it's my 3-pronged attack though to stay as relevant as I can with as little effort as possible.
You're doing a fine job of that.
Thank you.
And Brian, you mentioned books. People could still get your book, the Chic book, and you are hard at work on your next book.
That's right. So Blood and Fire, that's the title of the Chic book, and that's been out now for over a year and a half now, but it's still doing really well. And in fact, I'm still doing signings for that book, so I'm really proud of it. But the Gorilla Monsoon book, I think, will be even bigger, and I'm intimidated. I want to live up to people's expectations because he's such a beloved figure. But it's been moving along. I like I said, I recently interviewed Gorilla's widow, Maureen, and I'm going to be talking to his daughter, Valerie, this week. I'm getting through all the interviews now and just moving it along and getting the book ready to be written. I'm hoping to have it. I'm hoping that by a year from now that it will be very close to being available to be purchased. So that's exciting. And it's called Irresistible Force, by the way.
Did his widow? No spoilers, I guess. But did you spend much time talking about the death of Joey Marella?
I did. I spent actually a lot of the time on that because, the funny thing is back then the wrestling really was like the mob in the sense that, the wives were kept in the dark. They really were. So like the stuff that she was the most conversant on and wanted to talk about the most was family stuff, which I was more than happy to talk about, about her husband Gino and about her son Joey and what happened to him. And, that's going to be a major part of the book because unfortunately, the tragic death of Joey Marella is like the turning point moment in the life of Gorilla Monsoon, where basically, he was a relatively young man. People think of him as this grandfatherly figure. I mean, Gorilla Monsoon could have easily still been living today. He wasn't even old enough to collect Social Security when he died. And a big reason of why he unfortunately gave up on life was that he lost his son. So, I was happy, not happy, but I mean, it was important to me to talk to her about that because it's a very important part of the story.
Yeah, I mean, if even now when I'm watching old wrestling, you can pinpoint from Gorilla's announcing whether it was pre or post Joey's death. It completely different,
Yes.
in terms of his heart being in it and or sort of like phoning it in. It really came through, and he's a professional, so I know that he did his best, but he really became a different person after that.
Yeah, you can tell, and it also happened to be right around the time that JR was kind of coming in, and he was sort of getting phased out even before Joey died. But I mean, it was a combination of a lot of things where his heart just wasn't in it anymore, and he kind of was. I don't want to say he was just cashing a check, but I mean, his heart definitely wasn't in it anymore, and also he just was not taking care of himself anymore because he had been a lifelong diabetic and he kind of just stopped trying to think of his own health. He really, I mean it, it's not an exaggeration when I say that he just gave up on everything at that point. Yeah.
And the other thing that happened around that time, and I don't know how much this affected his performances, was losing Bobby Heenan, right? Heenan going over to WCW, you lost that act, and that act was such a special part of Monsoon, and it was like, it was Abbott and Costello, and he lost his Costello, and yeah.
And I talked to Bobby's daughter, Jessica, and I was really pleased to find this out because I really didn't know that they continue to still remain close friends and see each other socially, even when Bobby was working for WCW, which, back then there's people that would have been scared to do something like that. And basically the two of them just couldn't care less. Like, who was going to tell Gorilla no? They were still going on family vacations together and hanging out, and they were working for rival companies. Like, that's just heartwarming to me,
Yeah, I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that one. Yeah, anyway, can't wait for that book. Guys, thank you so much. We'll do it again soon. Everybody, thanks for listening, and we'll be back.